My background is in mixed martial arts, and my upbringing is what forced me to become a fighter. Growing up in the poverty-stricken neighborhoods of East Point, Detroit was no easy thing to do. The one lesson you learn in the streets is never back down. Those were the words that came to mind the night I had my encounter with the Shadowman. I had been working security at a local Detroit nightclub. This particular venue was in a very rough neighborhood. And that night, there were several fights. I was forced to rough up a few people and needed to step outside for a smoke break. Exiting through the back door of the club, I stepped out into the back alley. Adrenaline pumped through my veins, causing my heart to race and my skin to burn. This was a feeling that I was all too familiar with, and it felt good, but I needed to bring myself down. Standing there in the middle of the alleyway, I tilted my head back, looking up at the night sky, which was drowned out by the city lights. I was just beginning to calm down when I got this intense feeling that someone was watching me. Have you ever been somewhere and felt a person staring directly at you, only to look and realize that someone is looking right at you? Well, take that feeling and multiply it by 10. And that's what I felt. An overwhelming and intense sense that someone was coming straight at me. As I lowered my head, my eyes focused on what looked like a man in all black walking down the alley. The figure was abnormally large with wide shoulders. It was much taller than me, and I stand 6 feet 6 inches. While looking at this thing, I was hit with this intense fear that flooded my body, causing this tingling sensation that pulsed with every heartbeat. My gut instincts told me that this thing wasn't normal and I should run, but my body wasn't responding. I was stuck there, frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. And then it stepped into the light. And this thing was no man. Yes, it had the shape of a man. It moved like a man would. But it looked like someone had taken the darkest, most black smoke you could find and crafted it into the figure of a man. The smoke swirled and twisted inward on itself, almost as if some invisible barrier was holding it all in place. And the motion was slow, deliberate, and it seemed to absorb the light from above. Then this thing began to move forward, towards me, and my fight-or-flight response kicked in. I can still remember the exact thought that ran through my mind at that moment. Never back down. It was drilled into my head over the years from my instructors. Showing fear will only strengthen your opponent. In that same moment, I took a sliding step forward toward that thing and, raising my fist, was preparing for a fight. To my surprise, it retreated, moving backwards swiftly down the alleyway and disappearing. When I get back inside the club, I walked straight to the bar and had a shot of vodka. My mind was completely blown by my first encounter with the Shadowman. Later, he would return, and I wouldn't fare so well against him.
I'll never forget my first time seeing a Dogman. I was a little boy, no more than 9 years old. You see, my grandparents were black Southern Baptists, and I could never forget that day. It was at a revival service. Back in those days, Christian revivals were held outdoors, inside tents. And to paint a clear picture for you, if you can imagine being outside on a hot summer day with a huge white tent set up, rows and rows and rows of chairs, a makeshift stage, and people were heavy in the worship. This is my first time going to a revival. Although I've been dragged in and out of church every Sunday my entire life, I thought it was interesting. The way people worshiped out of the church was completely different than the way they worshiped in church. It was much more intense. And I could never forget the sounds of that day. The revival had started at about 3 o'clock and had gone on for hours. And right as the sun began to set and the pastor started doing the altar call to save souls, something weird started to happen. From my position on the right-hand side of the back row, I started to hear the strange sound coming from the woods, but I wasn't sure what it was. You could hear it faintly, just above the sound of the singing. Then as the singing and the clapping stopped, I could hear it clearer. Something was growling, and growling loudly. Initially, I thought I was hearing things until my grandmother started looking in the same direction as the sound. Then others in the congregation began to look that way too. And out from the wood line stepped something I had never seen before and hoped to never see again. This thing was massive, 9 feet tall, with the huge head of a wolf. Its fur was black, jet black, and his upper body had more muscles than anything I had ever seen. It just stood there, showing his teeth and growling. The people in the congregation finally caught on to it and began to run. The pastor grabbed his Bible and began to pray, repeatedly saying, "Get ye behind me, Satan. Get ye behind me, Satan." Until one of the deacons grabbed him by his collar and pulled him, yanking him off the stage. Everyone ran back to their cars and fled the area. I never knew exactly what that was that I saw until I heard you on Coast to Coast AM talking about the Dogman. I'm sure that not only did I see a Dogman, but 200 other people did as well. My wife and I had lived along the bayous of Southeast Louisiana our entire life. Hell, we grew up in the swamps. One of the proudest moments I can ever remember is when we bought our 3-bedroom home. Talk about waterfront property. Our house is directly on a waterway, and we have a front row seat to all of nature's wonders. Since we've been in this house, we've seen a lot of strange things. Alligators on our porch, rabbits and deer running by. But the strangest thing that we've seen over and over again is that around the end of the month, we get a special visitor. You call him Dogman. We call him the Rougarou. My wife and I often sit out on the porch and drink coffee late at night, just talking and laughing. And the first time we saw this creature, we thought it was extremely odd. Now, to paint a clear picture for you, my house is up on stilts, way above sea level. And from this vantage point, it gives us a clear view of the land. After you walk down my front set of steps, you have about 15 feet before you walk straight into the bayou. There's a landmass across the bayou from our property. And the way we're situated, the bayou kind of forms a T. The waterway that runs directly in front of our property then splits, going right and left. On the far side of that split is a levee. You can often see deer and rabbit and all kinds of wild creatures move along that levee to get back and forth throughout the bayous. Like I was saying, I still remember the first time we saw the Dogman. My wife and I were sitting there drinking coffee, talking, and I was smoking a cigarette. And my wife stood up and said, "Hey, what's that over there?" By the light of the moon, you can see a tall object moving. It walked upright like a man on 2 legs, but it moved kind of awkwardly, as if its upper body was leaning forward as it moved. My wife hustled into the house and grabbed the spotlight, and when we shined it across the bayou, what we saw we couldn't believe. I mean, this thing was huge, but it had the head of a dog. When it looked over at us shining the light, its eyes glistened this amberish yellow color. Then it turned its head and continued about its business. 20 yards later, it dove into the bayou, swam across to the levee, climbed up, and took off running. Now, we've seen this creature over and over and over again, and not once have we felt threatened. In fact, we just figured it was ignoring us, so it was a part of the wildlife and entertainment for us. That was until one evening my wife had this bright idea of having a house party. Now, house parties on the bayou are not exactly a wine and cheese event. We're talking about LSU football, Budweiser, cigarettes, whiskey, shotguns, screaming and talking loud. It's a party. And since we're out here on the bayous, there's no neighbors close by to complain to the cops. That night, my wife and I had been out on the porch talking. David, one of my co-workers, was there for the party. He had been shooting my shotgun all day long. He wasn't shooting at anything particular. More than anything, he was shooting just for the hell of it. Well, as night came, we all moved inside and left David out on the porch, beer in his left hand and shotgun in his right. And as my wife and I stood around talking in the kitchen, entertaining our guests, Dave came rushing into the front door, grabbed a box of shotgun shells, and hauled ass back outside. At first, I thought nothing of it. I just figured he was going to waste another $12 box of shotgun shells. Next thing you know, he's blasting away. Shot after shot after shot. It sounded like World War II was going on outside of my house. My wife looked me in the eye and said, "Go take that gun from Dave before he does something stupid." And when I walked out of the front door, that's when I realized what he was doing. Our friend, the Rougarou, was passing by just as he normally did. And for whatever crazy reason, David got scared or whatever was going on, but he started shooting at it. Now, keep in mind, this thing had been passing by our house for the past 12 to 18 months and never once came anywhere close. Now, as I looked across the bayou, it was walking directly towards us. I looked at David and said, "Man, what are you doing?" He was like, "You act like you don't see that monster over there." I said, "Of course I see it. Why are you shooting at it? It's a monster." We began to tussle a bit as I tried to take the shotgun away from him, which caught the attention of everybody inside the house. And they all came rushing out to the front porch. Now, while I'm attempting to take this loaded shotgun from Dave, who's had over 15 beers, my wife is constantly hitting me on the back saying, "It's coming this way. It's coming this way." After about 3 to 4 minutes of pushing and shoving, I finally was able to wrestle the shotgun from his grip. And when I turned my attention to the other side of the bayou, there it was, standing right on the edge of the waterway, no more than 50 yards away, looking directly at me. This creature was not afraid of us or the shotgun. It stood there staring at us. Its eyes glistened that same amberish yellow color, illuminated by the floodlights on the front of my house. Everything went silent. No one talked, and it didn't move, almost as if we were in some type of Mexican standoff. Then this creature looked directly at me, turned around, and walked the other way. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know of any creature in the wild that behaves this way. Since that night, we've seen it multiple times, and it's never come back near our house again. Part of me feels like we have this unspoken understanding with this creature. We'll leave it alone as long as it leaves us alone. And I intend to maintain that same understanding, because I would never want this thing coming in my house to get me.